All right. Oh, yeah. Was I whistling into the mic? Oh, good. Because I was whistling. All right. We are going to pick up in Judges chapter 8. And I kind of went back and forth on how to cover chapter 8, meaning that I'm a little behind. Today was supposed to be chapter 9, which is a very long chapter, which it's going to be I don't know, we'll have to skip a bunch if we cover everything. And I want to cover everything. Abimelech's important. Funny thing about Abimelech, in the song I was taught growing up, Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Abimelech, Tola, Abimelech was hardly a judge. So we're going to talk about that probably next week. I don't know. I was going to kind of quickly summarize chapter 8, but there's a lot in there I'd rather just cover, and we'll catch up. I think that might put us a couple weeks behind, maybe a week and a half behind. Anyway, it'll be all right. It'll be all right. Where we left off, you remember that they started the battle against the Midianites in the valley of Jezreel. And the way that battle started is that Gideon, with his 300 men in companies of 100, they surround the valley where they are camped out. Their weapons of choice, or the weapons commanded, were a jar, a torch, and a trumpet. We actually made the statement and made the observation they did not use a sword. The Bible doesn't tell us they used a sword. There was no need for a sword. And what happened is they surrounded them. It was there about 10 o'clock at night. Made the noise with the jars breaking. They blew their trumpets. They raised up those torches. And God actually turned Midianite swords against themselves. And we're going to find out in chapter 8 how many actually died in that valley. Then a bunch of them start running off. Gideon and his 300, and the way I read it, some more, because that second round, when they went and lapped up the water and he cut 9,700 guys, he sent them back to their tent, is what one of the verses says, rather than back home. So they may have joined the pursuit. And this was the pursuit map. I guess the orange and the green line, that's Midian and running. They're headed back down. They're going to cross the Jordan. And then Gideon is running behind them, chasing them back over to the east side of the Jordan, back into their territory. The red line coming up there, you remember that Ephraim comes out, and this is where we'll start. They got upset because they weren't invited to the battle, all right? But as this pursuit is going on, they actually end up killing 2 of the Midianite princes. And I think it was cool. Ed came up afterward last week talking about the names, what those princes' names meant. And it means the wolf and the raven. Isn't that right, Ed? Isn't that what it was? So pretty cool names of these princes. This sounds like guys you'll follow, some guys that you'll follow into battle. Anyway, they're doing that. But then they get upset. And that's where we'll start in verse 1. We may have read this at the end of the class. It says, the men of Ephraim said, what is this that you have done to us, not to call us when you went to fight against Midian? And they accused him fiercely. He said to them, what I have done now in comparison with you? What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of grapes of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer? God has given into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. What have I been able to do in comparison with you? Then the anger against him subsided when he said this. So a little bit of diplomacy, possibly, I guess we'll go with diplomacy, maybe a little bit of patronizing here and saying, hey, you guys did a great job too. You didn't have to come to the battle. And honestly, if they would have come to the battle and they sent a whole bunch of people, Ephraim, they would have been called out too. It was just 300 that ended up fighting. So they didn't know that they probably wouldn't even get to fight, even if they did send guys to the battle. Anyway, a harsh answer turns away wrath. I kind of think about that. Or a harsh answer, a soft answer turns away wrath. A harsh word stirs up anger. I read that completely backwards. So I think we see that here with Gideon telling Ephraim, listen, you contributed. Yes, I did not call you up, but you contributed to this battle. And they are appeased by this. They feel better about that. So at this point, as chapter 8 goes, what I think, the first time I read this, I think about it, and I think, what happens to Gideon? Something seems to change. Because Gideon here is at the same time one of the greatest heroes of Judges, but then also he becomes, in chapter 8, one of the most tragic heroes or leaders of Israel in the book of Judges. And I want to look at that and kind of examine that. We're going to see what happens with him. It looks like he kind of goes off the rails, and it looks like his motivation for what he is doing changes. Right now, his motivation is God-driven. He's doing exactly what God told him. He took the army down to 300. They attacked just what God said, and now they're pursuing Midian out of Israel. And so what I want us to kind of focus on as we go through this, let's pick up on where his motivation changes. Does his motivation change? Are his actions justified? That's a question I think we need to answer as we go through chapter 8. Are his actions justified? So let's jump ahead. We get here to verse 4. Gideon came to the Jordan, crossed over, he and the 300 men who were with him, exhausted yet pursuing. He said to the men of Succoth, "Please give us loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are exhausted, and I am pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." And the officials of Succoth said, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your army?" So they want to confirm, have you captured these kings? Or are you just pursuing them? Interesting thing to ask. We'll jump on ahead a little, then we'll come back and talk about it. So Gideon said, "Well then, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will flail your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars." And from there he went up to Penuel, and he spoke to them in the same way. Oh, was that me? Did I disconnect? Uh-oh. All right, we're just going to read it. I'll work on it in just a second. So we're in verse 8. The men of Penuel answered him, and the men of Succoth had answered. And he said to the men of Penuel, "When I come again in peace, I will break down this tower." Give me just 1 second. I'm going to try to reconnect to that, because it is helpful for you to see that, I imagine. It said I'm connected, Leonard. Hey, Leonard. Hey, Leonard, while everybody's staring at me. Hey, will you check the Apple TV, see if it's still turned on? Is a little white light on? Did you unplug it? Restart. Could not connect. Oh, good. Sorry. You can always depend on technology to fail. That's the right answer. I think I'm back. Boom. All right, good. Now, we're back. If it happens again, I'll move on. I won't put you through that. Or put me through that while y'all just stared at me while I clicked on a button. All right, so what we find here is two cities. Oh, this is terrible. Well, I tell you, the maps either don't have enough information or they have too much information. Where the red line crosses the river, you can see how it makes a little loop. That is Succoth and Penuel, okay? And that's where they are. So they've crossed over the river. They've gone over to into this. Maybe it's either Manasseh or Reuben, I think, right there, or possibly. Well, actually, it's Gad. Maybe on the border, because it is going through a valley where the mountains kind of come down. Anyway, they've crossed over. He's come to these cities, and all he's asking is for them to help him out. They're just asking for some bread and water, because they've been running for all these miles, chasing these people out of the land. And Succoth and Penuel, both cities, say, "No, we are not going to help you." My question is, why? Why would they say no? And I'm throwing that out. I know it's just us making up things. I don't have the answer's not here. They did have a condition. Have you captured these two kings? You know, I'm thinking through it. I think, well, maybe since they're on the east side of the Jordan, maybe these two cities have a different relationship with Midian, because that's where Midian is. It's a little farther south. Maybe they're kind of protecting that relationship. I don't know. Yes. So yes, the remaining army. Did we read that yet? Or are you jumping ahead? Way to jump ahead. spoiler alert, there are 15,000 remaining. So yeah, you remember that last week. We had Gideon's 300 against 135,000 in the valley. And at this point, there are 15,000 remaining, which if we math that out means 122,000 turned their swords on themselves in the valley of Jezreel. So to say that perhaps, yes. So perhaps Succoth and Peniel, yeah, maybe they're doing it out of self-preservation. If we take in these 300, what if the Midianite army and all 15,000 of them turn on us, and now they're attacking our city? That's a valid answer. I like that. I will forgive you for spoiling the numbers that come up on the next slide, even though you probably read this before anyway. It's all right. Yeah. Yes. Oh, that could be it. Maybe it's like Ephraim. Like Ephraim getting mad that they didn't get invited to the battle. And they're like, well, you didn't ask us to fight. Now you need us? No thanks. That's a good point. Because this is half the tribe and that's another thing. If it's in Manasseh there, that's Gideon's people. That's kind of funny. They have to deal, yes. So yeah, all these cities and tribes on the east side, if this thing goes sideways, they have to deal with Midian first. Right? It doesn't look good. We don't need your 15,000. No, that's really good. That's good. I think we may have solved it. I believe we solved it. Ed?
Yeah, I think the simplest answer is just they doubted that God was going to lead him to victory.
Okay.
Peniel gives them the same answer.
Yes, Peniel says the same thing.
You're going to lose, and then we're going to be on the wrong side.
Which makes it.
A lack of faith
What's a lack of faith in Gideon and God being with Gideon. But I think, that might be evident because they say, do you have those kings?
Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already?
Right. You don't even have them yet. Yeah. So they doubt whether he's going to actually accomplish this. Yes, sir.
Look a little deeper. We start with the two tribes and the half tribe,
Mm-hmm.
with Gad, half tribe Manasseh. In the conquest of the land, they're more than willing to go in with the rest of them. So that's under Joshua's rule. And you see that with Joshua, and the elders that outlive Joshua, and then you've got the generation that doesn't know the Lord, and every man does what's right in his own sight.
Right.
It looks like Israel as a whole at this point has stopped being a united kingdom group and moved more tribal in how they're responding to each other. That would explain why. But they are brethren. These are our brothers.
Yeah.
And they're playing this game with them. So it looks like in the time of the judges, there's a substantial national breakdown that has happened in here. In fact, so bad that in the time of Deborah, we don't have had men to stand up and go fight without having to drag women out there with them, which is just unheard of to happen. So they're really, the period of the judges is a very dark period for Israel.
And part of that is if you look at kind of a map of where these judges and where these events happened, it does look a little more localized at times, where these battles are happening, and maybe these tribes on the east aren't involved in this, and so they don't want to get involved in it. And so, like you said, it's kind of broken back down from being a united Israel to more tribal areas, and so no, they're not going to help. And the cool thing about that is, you go back in history, they were given the land on the east of the Jordan. The condition was, you come over here and fight with your brothers first, then you go back home and settle east of the Jordan. And now they're declining to fight with their brothers when they need them. So, yeah, maybe they're just kind of devolving into those tribes.
They actually even set up the stone altar right there at the banks to remind each other.
That was a big deal.
And teach their children that they were related even though they're separated by that river. Seems like that's just gone out the window.
All out the window. Yeah, and we're, what did we say, about 220-ish years removed from, it might be 40 more now that we have Gideon in the picture, from Joshua and all those happenings. So yeah, all that, the farther you get from something, right? That's why God says, and that's why so many times it says, and they forgot, and they forgot, and they forgot, because they get farther and farther removed from Moses, from Joshua, and the events where they took the land. All right, let's move forward a bit. The point here is that these two cities said, absolutely not, we're not going to help you. And Gideon said, well, I will be back. That's what he said. I'll be back. I guess I missed a good opportunity there. Judges 8, beginning in verse 10, Zebah and Zalmunna, the two kings, were in Karkor with their army, about 15,000 men, as we've heard. All who were left of the army of the people of the east, for there had fallen 120,000 men who drew the sword. That goes back to when it said that they drew the sword on each other that night that Gideon came in with the torches and the trumpets. Gideon went up by the way of the tent dwellers east of Nobah and Jogbinah, and attacked the army, for the army felt secure. Zebah and Zalmunna fled. He pursued them and captured the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and they threw all the army into a panic. So they have gotten to some point in the wilderness toward a city called Karkor, and they kind of settled down. It says they felt secure. This 15,000 troop army has gotten to a place where they think, okay, we can stop running. And perhaps they got that lead because Gideon stopped to see if he could get some rest at Succoth and get some bread and water. And so they continue to run, they get all set, but find out that Gideon does continue the pursuit. He captures Zebah and Zalmunna, and it would appear that the army, without their leaders, without their kings, they're just kind of thrown into chaos. It says they're thrown into a panic, and they kind of disperse at that point, and the story really is going to turn to Gideon and Zalmunna and Zebah at this point and see kind of how that plays out. We'll keep moving here. Gideon, the son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres, and he captured a young man of Succoth, and he questioned him, and he wrote down for him the officials and the elders of Succoth, 77 men. So whoever he captured from Succoth, he wrote down the names of the city leaders. Okay, gave that over to Gideon. He came to the men of Succoth, and he said, behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me. So you remember their response to, can we have bread and water, is, have you captured the king? Now Gideon is back, and he said, I have the kings. He said, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are exhausted? He took the elders of the city, who that young man he captured, he's given them that information. He took the thorns of the wilderness and briars with them, and he taught the men of Succoth a lesson. Well, you know what that sounds like? It sounds like what that guy has said to me before. He's going to teach me a lesson. It was never good. That is not a lesson you want to learn. I've told you before about Chuck. Chuck was his belt. The thing had a name. You did not want to go talk to Chuck because you would learn a lesson. The lesson they learned here, there's a word that's close to the Hebrew word about this teaching a lesson. I think it's called threshing, and you kind of get the idea of what he did. It appears that he tortured them with briars and brambles and thorns from the wilderness to the extent that he would have killed them. And in verse 17, it says that he tore down the tower of Peniel and killed the men that would be the leaders of that city as well.
Just in an irony here,
Yeah.
Peniel means the face of God. That's the location where Jacob wrestled with God, and that's the name he gave it. For I've seen the face of God, and that's where Jacob was given his new name, Israel.
Oh, good trivia. If you didn't hear it, Peniel.
It's like, well, think about the significance of that place.
No, I understand, but just as a trivial statement, not trivial, wrong word. And I was going to repeat that so everybody heard you. That Ed was saying Peniel means face of God, where Jacob wrestled with God. But go ahead and explain the irony. I think you're going to. Yeah.
That's where he gave Jacob his name Israel.
Yeah.
And where the whole nation comes from, it seems like the people there would have remembered that and acted.
Yeah, that's true. That's funny about all of these places. A lot of these places we find mentioned throughout Judges, and you could take them all the way back to Abraham. A lot of these places, and then even in the New Testament, you think about the woman at the well. She's at Jacob's well, and so these are very familiar areas, familiar cities, a lot of history, and you would imagine they would know that history, especially being that it was handed down verbally. These are stories that they were supposed to tell their children and their children's children and keep those traditions and those teachings alive. So the question here, and this is where, going back to where we started, was this justified? what he did to the leaders of Succoth and Penuel. Should he or should he have not killed the leaders of that city? That's a good question. I don't know the answer. He did it. But that's where you kind of start looking at, you remember we started with this. You remember what they said when they blew their trumpets and they raised their torches? They said, the sword of the Lord and Gideon. It feels like now it's just the sword of Gideon. Gideon is taking out some retribution against these cities because they did not aid him. Was it deserved? Should they have helped their kinfolks? Should they have helped their brothers when they were in a time of need? Maybe. Did it justify killing 77 leaders of one city and maybe about that number of another? Maybe, maybe not. I did read one. I'll just read this verbatim. I looked it up, and this was, I don't remember the commentary. It says, the punishment inflicted by Gideon upon Succoth and Penuel was well-deserved in all respects and was righteously executed. They had not only acted treacherously against Israel as far as they could from the most selfish interest, but in their contemptuous treatment of Gideon and his men, they had poured contempt on the Lord, who had demonstrated and shown before Israel that Gideon and his men were God's own soldiers. So if you think about it like that, it seems like it might be justified. They did not help the army of God when the army of God was pushing an enemy out of the promised land. So maybe it was justified, some sort of retribution against that city. Yes, ma'am?
But the text doesn't say that God told him to do this.
That's right.
It's a lot like it's his idea.
It's a stretch because there's no indication that God told Gideon to do that. That's where I fall. I think Gideon at this point is acting on his own. What's that?
Doesn't say he condemned it either.
That's true. That's true. So we're in that place. God didn't stop it, and it also doesn't tell us that God condemned him, taking that revenge back on those cities. So anyway, all right, let's go ahead a little bit more. All he asked for was food and water, a little bread. They didn't even say water; it's bread.
It's a pretty normal reaction. You remember David with Abigail and
Mm-hmm.
with Naboth, what was his name? Nabal.
Yeah,
That when he wouldn't send them food, he gathered up men to go and kill him and his servants. And she stopped it by bringing him food.
yeah. So that's a good point too.
It seems like it's a general reaction.
Hey, we need bread. No. In
Remember,
that case.
hospitality in that Eastern culture, hospitality is high on the list.
Yeah, I know.
Especially your brethren, but even strangers, you bring
Yeah.
them to the hospital, you protect them, you do a lot of things for them.
Yeah.
That's very cultural to them.
Yeah, hospitality is in their culture. You go all the way back to Abraham when he entertained the three men of God that came to visit him. And they would kill an animal to feed people, right? All right, let's move forward. We have Gideon now with Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings from Midian. He says, where are the men whom you killed at Tabor? He's questioning them. They answered, as you are, so were they. Every one of them resembled the son of a king. And so that kind of tells you how Midian, again, thought of Gideon. You remember they had that dream, and he was talking about Gideon's army is going to come and destroy us. And the Midianites already recognized the power that Gideon had. And it even said, interpreting the dream, that guy said, Gideon and he's talking about the Lord was with Gideon. And he's asking about these men from Tabor that Zebah and Zalmunna apparently came across at some point. And they said, well, we looked at them as we look at you. They looked like men of status. They looked like men of power. They resembled sons of a king, the son of a king. And he said, they were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had saved them alive, then I would not kill you. So now we got more motivation, right? And this is an interesting one now. And so we've already taken care of Penuel and Succoth. They crossed Gideon and they paid for it, justified or not. Now he's asking them about some folks that, this is one of those things where Gideon already knows the answer to the question. He's like, hey, tell me about the guys you killed at Tabor. They said, well, we thought they were princes. They looked like you. They were leaders. And he reveals that they were his brothers. So he said to Jether, his firstborn, rise and kill them. Now, with this, and the last verse here, it says they took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of their camels. You can take those two statements and we can kind of put together that at this point he has taken these two kings back to Ophrah. I don't know that his firstborn would be with him on this pursuit all the way in to the eastern part of Israel, to that Karkor was the city, and all the way back with those 300 men. So it indicates that he has now gone back to Ophrah. It mentions those camels, and so those kings probably riding their camels back under the now authority of Gideon, being captured by Gideon. And what he does is he tells his firstborn son to kill these two. But the young man, it says there, continuing in verse 20, did not draw the sword. He was afraid because he was still a young man. Why would Gideon tell his son to kill these two? Now, the other question is, again, was this justified to kill these two men? And here, I feel, for me, there's a different answer than the leaders of Succoth and Penuel, because the law, number one, in the actual Ten Commandments, it says, you shall not murder, right? Well, they murdered, apparently, Gideon's brothers. And so because of that, the law did allow you to go and take out retribution against someone who murdered someone from your family. The cities of refuge, they did not apply to murderers, they applied to manslayers, an accidental death, so that you could go to that city of refuge and not have revenge taken out by the family because it was an accidental type thing. But a murderer was justified by God in the law to have his life taken away by one of the family members of the person that was killed. So looking at it that way, Gideon was justified in taking the life of Zebah and Zalmunna because they killed his brothers. The only other side of that is that it was done in battle, maybe before the battle. Maybe it was related to the military, them occupying Israel in the Valley of Jezreel. But again, this is still Gideon really, I don't know, I feel like he's working on his own again. And he's carrying out this revenge, not only on those two cities, but now on these two kings. Now, all that to also ask the question, why would he ask his son? We don't have an answer to that. I don't know if that was a tradition. I didn't dig into it that far. But I think we completely understand why his son would say, no thanks. I don't know how old this young man is right here. I don't know. Maybe it was like a rite of passage type thing. These guys killed your uncle, so why don't you go take their lives? He declines, and so in verse 21, Zebah and Zalmunna said, rise yourself and fall on us. In other words, Gideon, don't hand it off to someone else. If you're going to do this, be a man and do it. For as the man is, so is his strength. And Gideon arose, killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of their camels. Those crescent ornaments now are going to play into this kind of important as we move forward. So that kind of wraps up the battle, getting rid of the Midianites, right? He's run them all back. The army has scattered in chaos and dispersed. Two princes have killed at the hands of Ephraim. 2 kings have been killed at the hands of Gideon. And so now, what do we do? Where do we go from here? Let's see. We pick up in verse 20 here. Nope. Where is it? Let me go forward. Sorry about that. 22. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. However they die, it was like you said, commissioned by God because they were enemies. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so this is less about vengeance and more about just finishing the battle with these two. So it is a little different than killing the men of the city. I think it has a little different view to it. But yeah, this killing these two or finishing it up. I think the odd thing about it is him offering for his son to do it. But anyway, that does kind of wrap up the battle with the Midianites. It confirms their leadership is dead. These kings, these princes, however that leadership worked. We know that 120,000 fell in the valley of Jezreel. The other 15,000 have scattered back. You could probably assume back into Midian over east of the Jordan. So the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you and your son and your grandson, also, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian." Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you, and the Lord will rule over you." Gideon said to them, "Let me make a request of you. Every one of you give me the earrings from his spoil." They had golden earrings in parentheses because they were Ishmaelites. Excuse me. And they answered, "We will willingly give them." And they spread a cloak, and every man threw in it the earrings of his spoil. So earrings they've collected from the spoil of battle. And that kind of goes back to the gold he also pulled off of those camels. And now he's collecting gold. First thing we got to recognize here, though, is that Israel, this portion of Israel that he has saved from Midian, are now calling on Gideon to be their king. Rule over us, your son and your grandson, meaning that now we'll place you as king, and as royalty works, you follow the line, the hierarchy. The son becomes the king when the king dies, and so on and so forth. Y'all watch the state dinner, any of that with Trump and the King of England, King Charles, this week? I love all of the ceremony of it, and it's really cool, real fancy with the castle and they're in the little chariot and all the, not chariot, the carriage, I guess. But I did read a thing, it was funny, that they were criticizing, and I'm going to say this again, I'm not being political, they were criticizing President Trump for not bowing to the king. He just reached out, shook his hand, grabbed his elbow. All these things are terrible things to do, apparently. So I read the comments, because that's where the fun part is. And all the comments say exactly what I say. We fought a war 250 years ago to not bow to a king. I thought, man, that was the good comment right there. America, let's go. All right. So here, they're calling on Gideon to be a king. Gideon declines. "I will not rule over you, neither his son." He says, "The Lord will rule over you." What a great answer. Thank you, Gideon, for making that statement. Then, again, Gideon does something I think that is that's kind of puzzling. He asks for all that gold that they've collected, right? And I don't remember, is it the next verse? The weight was 17,000 shekels. I think it was about 50 pounds of gold is where it, kind of what that compares to. 50 pounds, that's a lot of gold, by the way. 50 pounds of gold. And so he takes that, it says here, besides the crescent ornaments and the pendant. So he collected about 1,700 shekels, 50 pounds of gold just from the spoil. Then he has the pendants and the ornaments that he had from those kings and from their camels, the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian. So all that he collected from them. It talks about the collars that were around the necks of their camels, all that stuff that he's collected. All right. Verse 27, Gideon made an ephod of it and put it in his city of Ophrah. And all of Israel whored after it. And that word's come up several times in Judges. They whored after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. So Midian was subdued before the people of Israel. They raised their heads no more, and the land had rest for 40 years in the days of Gideon. Gideon says, "I will not be your king. However, if you give me enough gold, I'm going to make an ephod." What's an ephod? You remember? It's that breastplate thing that they made for the Levite priests to wear. And it had all the jewels in it, 12 of those stones, each representing one of the tribes. And so he creates this thing, and this is not good, okay? Because and some you'll read, some of the commentaries or scholars, people, it's almost like Gideon was, now the place of worship was not, it was down in the tribe of Ephraim, actually, is where the tabernacle was. All that was still there. Like, we got to remember that. We kind of forget about that. That was still established. The tabernacle was there. That's where Joshua left it. The Levites are still the priests. They still have the Ark of the Covenant, all these things. But it's almost like Gideon is creating another place of worship. Even though he said, "No, I'm not going to rule over you. God's going to be your king. However, let's make this ephod. And how far has he gone from being that man that goes in and destroys the altar of Baal in his hometown, almost lost his life, his dad saved his life, they were ready to kill him the next morning, and now he creates what appears to be an idol for them, as it says that they hoard after it. Meaning, and I remember we talked about that back in the first couple of chapters, it is as if to say that they are cheating on God with their worship, right? And Gideon has created this, and it says not only was it a snare for all Israel, but also a snare for Gideon himself. How could he have fallen so far? Again, someone who is one of the greatest heroes and judges. And now this kind of becomes the legacy. This is what we read that he does toward the end of his life. And I don't know, in making the ephod, Gideon, he just kind of, he perverts the worship that they should be giving to God, the way God wants to be worshiped, the way he laid it out in the law. Obviously, what he does is sinful. There are, it kind of harkens back to Aaron when he called out for all the gold. Remember, they to make the golden calf, he wanted all the gold, and all that gold was stuff that they took from the Egyptians when they left on the Exodus, and then they create an idol of worship. And so this sounds very familiar that Gideon says, hey, bring me all your gold. And instead of putting me as your king, we're going to serve God, but I'll make this for us too. And that happened a lot. And this may have been even what was happening in Ophrah before, with Joash allowing an altar to Baal, but also worship to God. Those two things happening at the same time. But again, it is amazing how far Gideon kind of falls here. And it's pretty sad. He kind of comes full circle. The guy that tore down the altar to Baal is now creating a new object of worship that is going to lead his people away. It does end the way a lot of the judges' stories end. Midian was subdued, the enemy was subdued, and it says that the land had rest for 40 years. That rest indicating that they weren't fighting with someone, not being attacked during that time. You remember it was it 40 years before this? And then Midian, over that 7-year period, came in and occupied the land. But now we're looking forward to 40 years of rest, even though there was still that idol worship creeping in. Then verse 29, we'll wrap up 8, and we'll call it a class. It says, Jerubbaal, remember Gideon, that was his nickname, will Baal contend. The son of Joash went and lived in his own house. Gideon had 70 sons. This is all important leading into chapter 9. His own offspring, for he had many wives. And his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he called his name Abimelech. And Gideon, the son of Joash, died in a good old age and was buried at the tomb of Joash his father at Ophrah of the Abiezrites. As soon as Gideon died, the people of Israel turned again and whored after the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. The people of Israel did not remember, there's that term again, they forgot God. They did not remember the Lord. This is what they were warned about when they were still in the wilderness. Do these things so you will not forget who had delivered them from the hand of their enemies on every side. And at this point, it's only been 40 years. Boy, it doesn't take them long. And they did not show steadfast love to the family of Jerubbaal, that's Gideon, in return for all the good that he had done to Israel. So they turned not only against God, but now they're just turning against the entire family of Gideon. They just kind of throw it all back in his face. Again, the important part of this, they had 40 years of rest. He had a whole bunch of sons, but there's one son that gets named here. So now we know the name of two sons, actually, going back a little bit in the chapter. And that leads right into chapter 9. Again, a very long chapter with a lot of stuff going on with Abimelech. And so we're going to jump in that chapter next week. We'll start with chapter 9. And I doubt we'll get through it in 1 week, but we'll do our best. So thank you again. Have a great week. And thanks for your participation. See you.